I think we are living in such a day that is quite a day to be alive. Not because we have good stuff coming, like it's all, you know, it's just nothing but ease and relaxing in the future. That's not what I mean. But I do think there is a destiny that is coming about and is being unfolded before us, that this is specifically for this generation to apprehend. It is for us and it is for our time. And oftentimes, what I see, the enemy attacks in very similar ways, regardless of which generation he's trying to stop. If you look at Moses, he must have sensed there was something happening, that he sent out and through Pharaoh put wickedness in his heart and killed babies of an entire nation. I mean, it had to be thousands of babies that were murdered. When Jesus was born, Jesus knew that something was happening, that he wiped out every child 2 and under in an entire village. Right? What his tactic is anytime he senses that God is about to do something powerful, or that God is preparing a generation or a work, he's going to stop it before the battlefield ever gets there. He wants to defeat you way before you ever see your battlefield. The battlefield that every Christian was designed and born for, the enemy wants to wipe you out before you ever get there. So when you get to the battlefield, there was going to be the freedom and the proclamation of God's glory on the earth that God purposed for it to come through you. You'll just walk right by it because you wouldn't even know. Because by the time you got there, you were already defeated. And I see God doing something very similar in our generation. We know that there's just the abortions. We're wiping out more babies today than any other time of history, So there's clearly something happening in the background where the devil senses that something is coming and he's trying to wipe out a generation. I don't care about the motivations. I don't care whether, I get for not casting babies in the fire to worship a God that did that in the past, but we are motivated by the same stuff, right? Which is selfishness and pride and our own self-centeredness. But the purpose is he'll use different tactics, but he's always trying to wipe out a generation before it has a chance to stand against him, before it has a chance to really apprehend what God has for them. And so with the babies, it's quite obvious, right? Clearly, they're being taken out at a very innocent stage of life, and it is a tragedy. But as we grow older, he tries to do the same thing in our lives. He doesn't want to face you on the battlefield because he knows he cannot prevail against the Spirit of God that is inside of you. He cannot prevail against the purposes of God that are in heaven, that he has given for you to fulfill. He cannot prevail. As to what he can do, though, is he can stop you from ever wanting to fight. And what I see is that what I want to talk about today is hope. Because a generation that loses hope will lose the battle in their eyes. They're going to lose the battle. They're not going to go out and fight. They're going to stay home and complain. And I see the enemy. He is trying to steal an entire generation's hope for the future. And today, I came to tell you that there is great hope for your lives. There is great hope. Forget what you saw on the news about the economy. Forget about the wars. I'm not saying none of that matters. It does. But in the context of what's happened globally, in the context of our own issues and crises in the nation, God is going to do mighty things. And I believe that is for you to apprehend. And I believe that today, I just want to tell you that God is going to do mighty things through you as a generation that others would have only have dreamed of seeing. When the enemy comes, the opposite of hope, especially in the church, isn't hopelessness, it's worry. Both worry and hope, they latch on to your perception of the future. And if the enemy can get you to worry, he's going to stop you from being God-focused, and it's going to become very self-focused, very now-focused. And the enemy is whenever it's time to rise up, he says, relax, right? God is a God of peace. Whenever it's time to repent, he's going to say it's not that big a deal. He's always trying to thwart your perception of the future and what God is doing. But I think that God is raising up a generation that I'm going to call a Daniel generation. as I'm going to explain this in a little bit, but I want to read Hebrews 6:19 first. So this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which enters the presence behind the veil. There is a hope that is an anchor of your soul. And when you lose this hope, and again, there is a loss of hope for those who don't know Christ, but there is also a loss of hope for those who know Christ but not living for a purpose. Right? They're just waiting to survive. When you lose your hope, you lose an anchor that is meant to hold you down, that is meant to be your stability. Hope is, I'm going to define as the sure and confident expectation of receiving what God has promised for us in the future. The world will talk about hope is like, oh yeah, I hope that will happen. I hope you have a good day. But when God talks about hope, it talks about something, it's kind of like faith is a substance. Faith is you believing that you have it before you have it. Hope is you rejoicing in what you will have as though you already have it. And when a generation loses hope, they lose joy. But if you look at Daniel, it fascinates me because if I was to look at you, especially the young generation, and say the things that you are growing up into in the world that you are stepping into, it's going to be a land of opportunities and a land of provision and so forth, with nothing bad happening. That wouldn't be honest. But at the same time, Daniel was born in one of the worst parts of history in the Israel nation. They were led away captive 3 or 4 times in their history, and Daniel was born right in the middle of that. He was born in a time when he was raised up. He clearly must have had some form of education because he wasn't just an average Joe guy off the street. He was one that the people identify he has potential. That's a person of high potential. See, he was born at a terrible, terrible time of history. And then as he's being trained, I just can imagine him studying, giving himself the stuff. Like the wisdom he had, yes, it was from God, but it wasn't just him like waking up one day and God is like, it's all there. I'm sure he was studying his scripture. I'm sure he was being tutored and he was being raised up in the ways of God. Those things inside of him didn't just simply come out of nowhere. So this young man that's being raised up, that's being taught, that has this amazing future in front of him, talking about the potential of what he might do, the impact that he might make, the ways that he can serve God in the temple, for his nation, in the government. I don't know the dreams that he had, but there came a war that destroyed it all. Not only that, but the entire nation was taken captive and led away. And this young man was taken to a foreign land, into Babylon, as a slave. And yes, he was taken into the palace where he would continue to be trained. But it was one of the worst parts of history. And what a great time to just lose hope and say, I was going to serve God, but hey, I'll just keep my head low and survive. I was going to do these great things for the nation of God to bring about His glory, that all the world may know that this is God's people. But you know what? I guess I'll just serve the king and, make sure the bloodline survives, at least for some of us. Right? What a great time for him to have lost hope. But we see the exact opposite. Why? Because of how he gave himself to God. He didn't sit and say, God, why this? Forget that. I'm tired of this. He gave himself in devotion to God by separating himself from the king's table, from being willing to pay the sacrifice. We see his prayer life, right? I don't know what his prayer life was like, but I bet it wasn't the prayer life of complaining. I bet there was a prayer life of fervent expectation, of faith, of praise, of worship of who he is. I bet that he was a man who believed and expected God to do things. Why do I believe that? Because if he wasn't, he wouldn't have done the things that he's done. Right? If he wasn't expecting God to speak, he wouldn't have gone to the king having nothing to present and say, give me some time and I'll tell you what it means. Where do you get that kind of expectation? There must have been a hope inside this young man that said, I know my God will do things. I'm going to go and present to the king and saying, give me time and I'll come back to you with the answer. So this is a man of great hope in the midst of the circumstances. And I see something very similar for our generation. Even though there is, I don't know what's coming, right? But we all know that it's not a time of just free of worry and free of suffering, or even, like, I know a lot of young people don't necessarily see the future being brighter than the current state of America. Like, I get that. But I want to tell you that if your objective is to just simply live and enjoy the pleasures of this world, yeah, it's going to be a little harder for you than it was for the previous generation. But if your objective was to bring about the kingdom and the glory of God, you're going to have the most profound opportunities that others never had. Daniel would never in his life had audience with a Babylonian king if he wasn't led away captive. So yes, you can complain that we were taken into captivity, or Daniel could have, or you can look at it as he was given the perfect platform to influence a major, powerful nation for the glory of God. And I want to tell you, you are going to have platforms and opportunities to have major influences in this culture, in your communities, and your families for the glory of God. Not because all their needs have been met and all of us have gotten fat and lazy, but because there's going to be crises that we are already seeing. There's going to be needs that we are already seeing, and you're going to come with the answer. You're going to come with the power. You're going to come with the wisdom. And this is what the generation needs to rise up and understand. And all of us are part of this generation. If you're alive today, you are a part of this. But the young people are going to have to own this more so. Because they're going to have to go further, and they're going to have to see, I think they're going to see a little bit more of what's to come. And you have to own the expectation of what God is going to do. You have to have a hope. If you don't have a hope, you're not going to step out. If you don't have a hope, you're going to shrink back. If you don't have a hope, you're going to become discouraged and stop trying way before your battlefield arrives. You need to be preparing and having hope and declaring things that are not as though they were, so that when your battle comes, when your opportunity comes to stand before the Babylonian king, so to speak, you're ready. You're ready. But that comes through a training process. Hope is a choice. Hope is actually learned. It's not something you wake up with or just feel good about one day. But this is the amazing thing, is we have Babylon, which is a wicked nation, and multiple times through scriptures, 3 times specifically, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, or King Darius, make a proclamation for God's glory. In Daniel 2, verse 46, we read, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to the king. Incense to the king answered, I'm sorry, let's start over. That's okay, we're family, right? It's a little bit of grace. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to the king. Answered Daniel and said, Truly your God is a God of gods and the Lord of lords and revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. That's you, young generation. And then in Daniel 3, so this is the story of, again, I'm just reading the proclamations, but there were some crises that follow these, that God brought about the answer through Daniel. And then there came a time where Nebuchadnezzar said, you know what, I'm going to have people worship me. I'm going to build this statue. I'm going to have everybody bow down and proclaim how great I am. And there were 3 men who refused to do so, and they were willing to pay the price for that. And they were condemned to death, thrown into a fiery furnace. They were not burnt up. Jesus shows up among them. They come back out, and this is the proclamation of Nebuchadnezzar saying, Daniel 3, verse 28, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted them in the province of Babylon. And then came a time when Daniel was forbidden from praying. He prays anyway, and this is the decree that King Darius makes in Daniel 6, verse 25. King Darius wrote to all the people, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men shall tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and he rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." This was a young man, who were taken to Babylon, who lived with hope that caused a foreign wicked king to proclaim the glory of God amongst multiple nations. And I want you to know is regardless of what the stock market does, the glory of God is showing up for this generation. Regardless of what happens in the world, and I'm not saying we should be blind to it, but I'm saying don't lose hope because of it. Okay? I want you to look at your life with anticipation and excitement because God desires to do something through you. Whether it's going to be in the temple of God or whether it's going to be in the palace of Babylon, it doesn't matter. God is here to proclaim His glory and establish His kingdom. And there is a Daniel generation that I would say is a generation that is preoccupied with the preservation of His glory. They're not preoccupied with their own glory, with their own accomplishments, with their own desires. They are preoccupied with the glory of God, and they're willing to pay a price for that. They're willing to pay a price. They're willing to lose their jobs. They're willing to face rejections from people they love most. They're willing to even face some deep personal costs to promote God's glory and preserve His glory. The most modern day example that comes to me is Charlie Kirk, right? Because why in the right mind, if he wasn't someone who needed to go on campuses and do this and face all the backlash behind of it, being called racist and a Nazi and all these things, simply because he was defending the glory of God in the view of politics and other things. And I'm telling you today, some of you need to rise up and get a little fire in your bones for the glory of God. Some of you need to get a little bit upset when the media, when the entertainment, when your friends are mocking the things that God has spoken. It's not okay. And as if you become a little zealous for Him, He'll be zealous for you. If you become a little zealous in your heart, then maybe He'll show up with a bit of zealousness, with power behind the words that we are speaking. But if we are passive, if we withhold, if we withdraw and shy away from conflict, shy away from a confrontation, then I don't think the power is going to show up through that. Daniel and the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were willing to stand in the face of physical danger. And I think, there's definitely that happening today too. But for us, we have to be willing to stand in the face of something. What do you have to stand in the face of in order to proclaim the glory of God in the earth? And I want you to know that God desires to pour out His glory. And I'm not He's always wants to pour out His glory. He always wants to be more manifest than He is. But I believe there's a generation which is happening today that He wants to pour out His glory in a new way. But it's going to take us to stand up in a new way. It's going to take you to get shaken up a little bit. It's going to take you to get a little bit rattled by situations, right? It's going to take us to get a little bit fire behind what's happening. And you might say, hey, why can't we be the Solomon generation, right? Why can't we be the ones that come into all the provisions and just simply enjoy it and have the gifts of wisdom so we can sit, have people come to us and answer questions? Hey, I wish we were the Solomon generation too, okay? But we're not. We're not the ones who are going to be sitting in a comfy place with having foreigners or so forth coming and asking for wisdom and to be imparted into. We're just not. But you have to own the time that you were given. You have to own it. And for each generation, God has given the grace that you need. And that's where, if you look in the future, especially if you're older and you look at the next generation, you say, man, they're doomed. Keep that to yourself, because they're not. Okay? Just because they have challenges that you don't have the grace for doesn't mean they were not designed to thrive in that environment. You were designed to thrive in the political environment, in the economic environment, in the global environment that is happening today. I'm not talking about, again, in your natural, even though I think God will provide in every area that you need. You cannot advance the kingdom if you're broke and homeless. You need certain things, and God will provide in abundance for you. But I'm ultimately talking about the preservation of God's glory on the earth and a declaration of it among all the nations and among all the people that we were called to do. So how can you have hope in tough times? 3 things, 3 reasons why we can have hope. Doesn't matter how tough the time is. And I grew up with a generation, my parents' generation and their parents, they grew up in persecution. A lot of songs we sang on Sunday morning when I was growing up were written in prisons. So that's where you look at these Slavic cultures, they're very solemn, they're very serious. There's a reason for that. There's a lot of suffering behind it. And we as a young generation growing up in America, we had to honor and respect what they have gone through instead of simply saying, like, why are these songs so slow and sad? They were written in prison. But they were written out of true devotion. And I want you to know that it doesn't matter where you are, you can walk with hope. And I've seen that in people. I've seen that in people who have faced tremendous oppositions. They were totally unjust, and yet they are walking in life with the hope of what God is going to do for not only for them, but also for their children. So 3 things. Number 1 is God is faithful. If He has spoken things, whether it's in the Word or He has spoken to you personally, take Him at His word and believe it as though, I should say it differently, rejoice as though you already have it. You can measure somebody's hope, and this is not a perfect way of saying it, I don't think, but you could almost measure somebody's level of hope by the level of their joy. If they're walking around sad, it's typically because they don't have hope. If they're walking with joy, it's easy to be joyful if you just won something or if you had breakthrough. That's awesome. But if you're walking with consistent joy in life, you're probably full of hope for what is to come. You're probably rejoicing in that which you don't have yet. So if God has said something in His word, or He has spoken to you personally, rejoice as though you already have it. 1 Corinthians 1:9. God is faithful, by whom you were called into the fellowship of His Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. So God is faithful, by whom you have been called. If He's spoken it, you can rejoice for it now. Don't wait until it's fulfilled. Number 2, this world is temporary. All of this will pass, but there will be an exceedingly great reward in heaven. So you can there's a sign of a maturity in the Christian, is the more maturity you grow in Christ, the more heavenly minded you become. If all you can see in front of you is what you have today, you're not in tune with what God is doing. Because God is moving on the earth, and I think what He's doing on the earth matters, but ultimately, our home is going to be in heaven. Ultimately, our reward is going to be in heaven. 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at things which are seen, but at things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." The rewards that you have laid up for yourself by the proclamation of God's glory on the earth that aren't seen will be far greater than anything you could have obtained here on the earth. So pursue the things that you need to pursue. I love how a lot of you guys pursuing and apprehending being debt-free. I love, if you're in college, work hard and apprehend the career, the degree that you are going for. All those things are good and right. But ultimately, pursue the reward, which is gonna come from the Lord when He comes. And that is why we can live with great hope, because ultimately, we are about what God is doing on this earth, about manifesting heaven, not just enjoying the temporary. And number 3 is our reward is eternal. So this world is temporary, and our reward is eternal. "And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to give to everyone according to his work. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are those who do His commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city." So what happens when hope is gone? Or when hope shakes? We see this in Scripture with the Israelites. The biggest thing that they fell into time and time again was complaining. It wasn't a lack of faith of them saying, "I don't know if that wall will fall." It was a lack of hope that God will actually come through. And when you lose hope, you lose your joy. And without joy, you fall into complaining. So you complain about what's coming in the future, even though it's not here today. So you can choose the lens through which you are looking at the future, at your own future. And that lens is either going to cause you to rejoice because it's a lens of hope of what God is going to do, or it's going to cause you to complain because it's a lens of worry of all the obstacles you'll have to overcome to actually get there. But if you lose hope, typically 3 things happen. We become self-absorbed. We become passive. And if there was ever a generation of passivity, it would be today. But why would you fight for a future you don't think is bright? You wouldn't. So I see a lot of people becoming discouraged because this is harder, that is harder. Don't be discouraged. The very discouragement itself, it brings about passivity, which ultimately leads to downfall. And we see, even in Jesus' time, they were hoping for a Messiah, but because of their own suffering, they become self-absorbed. So when they looked at the Messiah that was to come, what they were hoping for, it was a deliverer that would free them from Rome. They looked through their future through the lens of their own suffering, instead of through the lens of how is God going to be glorified here on the earth. They looked at it through the lens of self-preservation. Certain religious leaders had power that they didn't want to let go of. They became self-absorbed. Because they lost hope, in the midst of bad situations, God's kingdom can be advanced and God's name can be proclaimed and glorified. And ultimately, that's our purpose on the earth. Whether you're going for engineering, nursing, mechanic, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, our purpose here is to bring him glory, is to bring his heart joy. And there is a term in psychology that's called learned helplessness. And there was a psychologist that observed this. His name was Martin Seligman. I think he was Indian. And he looked at how they trained elephants. They would take a young elephant and they would chain its foot to a stake in the ground. Because it was young, they could hold it down, with a pretty big sized stake. And as it would walk, it would feel the tug and it would fight, and then it would stop and give up because he's chained. And as he grew older, he learned that as soon as he feels that tug, he stops right there. So they would take these elephants and train them this way so they can go and travel with them for circuses or whatever it is they want to do. And the only thing they would use to hold this massive elephant, right? I mean massive, massive elephants. I don't know how much they weigh, but they're big. They would put a little stake, a wooden stake in the ground with a rope on his foot. And the elephant would walk, feel the gentle tug, and he would stop. Because from his very childhood, he'd been programmed that when I feel that tug on my leg, that is my limits of where I could go. So although it would almost take no effort at all to just simply go bloop and pull that stake out, he doesn't do it. And it's a term that in psychology, they call it's learned helplessness. But this doctor said, if you can teach somebody helplessness, which happens in our lives too, sometimes it takes a Christian 2 or 3 discouraging encounters with an unbeliever to stop evangelizing for the rest of their life, right? I mean, how many of us have been there? How many of us have had a discouraging experience and it took you a month to recover? All of us have been there. But I want you to know that when God shifts a season, you need to be aware of it. When God says, yes, you had bad experiences, but right now it's time to go and do it again, and expect different results, you need to get up and do it, because different results are coming. But he said, if you can teach an animal hopelessness, can you teach them hope? Can you teach them endurance? Can you teach them that thing that causes them to go further? So what he did is he took mice, put them in water, and just let them swim. And it took them about 10 minutes and they drowned. So the mouse would swim in the water, it would get to 9.5 minutes, struggling, the panic sets in, right, and then the mouse drowns. So he said, okay, so that's the limit, the starting point. He took another set of mice, or I think it was actually rats. He took another set of rats, put them in water, and he left them there for 9.5 minutes. And then at 9.5 minutes, you see that panic start to set in the rat, and he takes them out. He dries them off, gets them warm and comfy, and then a certain period of time later, puts them back in. And what he found is a second time, they didn't last 9.5 minutes. They lasted, I'm going to butcher the numbers as far as the intermediate numbers, but it was like 16 minutes before that panic set in, and he took them out again. He dried them off, he made them feel comfortable, and an hour later, or whatever it was, put them back in. And that time, it was actually half an hour by the time that panic set in. So he took them out again, dried them off, made them feel comfortable, comforted them, they're safe, and an hour later put them back in. He worked up to 36 hours of swim time. 36 hours. I mean, I know it's terrible for the rats, but the idea, yeah, I'm sure they got really nice treats and had very cozy lives afterwards. But the idea here is think about how God treats us. You might say, why am I in this situation again? Because God says, you have gone this far, I have taken you, I have dried you off, I have comforted you, I have healed you, and I put you back in. But now you can go not 9 minutes, but 16 minutes. And when you reach your limit, God takes you out again. And he says, it's okay, I'll comfort you, I'll heal you, and I'll put you back in. And now you can go 3 hours. And now you can go 5 hours. And you never know. What I'm trying to say is that just because you've been in situations where panic set in and you were not sure how you were going to get out, go back into those again if God is leading you there. Because God is working hope in your life. God is building hope in your life. And what would have killed you 2 years ago, you can step into with victory today. And that is the picture that I see for this generation, is God is building up hope. And if you are in a season of you feel like that little rat that's been put in the water, taken out, embrace it, because God is building resilience for the journey that you need to go. And you can't swim the distance that you need to swim in 9 minutes. You need 36 hours. And once you're able to be there, God will be there with you to get you to that point. But I believe we're going to see great power, we're going to see great manifestations, and ultimately we're going to see God glorified on this earth in greater ways than we could have imagined. In hope, and I'll go through these quickly, there is rest. In Acts 2:26, we read, "Therefore my heart rejoices, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope." If you need rest, hope is your answer. In hope, there is power. Romans 15:13. "Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing." Again, we see the joy and peace, "that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." Yes, this is talking about we actually live in hope by His power. But also, I believe if we live in hope, you're going to see His power. So I think if we are to see His power, you need to first live in hope. Because you will go towards places that you're looking at. When I did motorcycle training, they said, don't worry about steering, just look where you want to go and you'll go there. So you literally turn your head and there you go, so we do that kind of thing. Where whatever it is that you see in your mind, you're going to be going towards that place. And that's where we have people who are the learned helplessness or the self-destructive behaviors. I forget what it's, self-sabotage is what they call it in psychology. There's behaviors of self-sabotage that if your vision for the future doesn't match your reality, even though your reality today is better, you're going to sabotage it until it matches what your vision was. And we've seen this personally with people where you have literally what you've always wanted, what you've been hoping for, whatever, but it doesn't quite match with your understanding and vision of who you are in the future, where you were going. So you sabotage it to go back to this, almost as if like this is a dream, I need to wake back up, And I believe God is wanting us to see a better future so we can actually apprehend a better future. Number 3 is strength. Be of good courage, and He shall strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord. That was Psalm 31:24. He shall strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord. Strength speaks of endurance. Power speaks of the power to accomplish something. Strength, for those who are hoping in the Lord, He will provide you strength. There is strength in hope. And the last one is there is joy in hope. Romans 12:12. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer. I believe the church should be the most joyful people, not because they have the best experiences in life. That's not true. And sometimes it's actually the opposite. And sometimes that's what confounds the world, is saying, why do you have joy? Clearly your life is not better than mine. But we should be the most joyful people because we should have the ability to rejoice in that which has not happened yet. And you can say, how can I rejoice in that? You need to hear your Father and what He's saying to you. If you can hear His voice and believe what He is saying, you can actually rejoice in what He has said. And first and foremost, it comes from the Bible that my son brought me there. You must first believe what He has spoken about you and rejoice in it. You might not feel it. You might not even be convinced of it. You might not know the timing of it, but you can simply say, I'm going to rejoice because I know what the heart of the Father is towards me. And if this is His heart towards me, I know that I will apprehend it. So today, I have hope for the future because I think in this room, for those who choose to receive the call, there are Daniels being raised up. There's a generation of Daniels that's being called forth. You're not a generation that, and I think it's generation of Daniel because there's hard things coming. But nonetheless, do you want to be someone who says, I lived in the blessing of God and did nothing with my life, I just enjoyed His blessing my entire life? Or do you want to be going down in history as we look back on this earth, as we talk about it in heaven and whatnot, as someone who has brought about great measures of glory and advancement of His kingdom? I'd rather be a Daniel than a Solomon. And I love Solomon, right? Nothing against him, but there's something about it, the powerful manifestation that my heart is crying out for. There's something about the power of God that my heart is crying out for. Not for us to live and enjoy the comfort, but for us to go into places where power is needed and then power is given to meet the need. And as we talked about last week of generosity, yes, we have been in places where you have received generosity, but you as a generation are called to be the ones who are meeting that need. You're not meant to be the one who receives the bag of groceries or gifts or credit cards or whatever it is on your front step all the time. You should be the one that's dropping those off. That's your call. You have been given every provision, and if you're faithful with it, you will be given more to be the provider, not the one who's always declaring, I have been so in need. Sometimes we misrepresent God by our neediness. God is not a God of need. God is not a God of lack. He does not lack any power. He does not lack any resource. I believe we need to be a people of power and provision and abundance to share with others. And the first place that I want to see that is in places like this altar, meaning that power that everyone who comes here who is not born again can encounter salvation. It's not something that happens because there's a good message. It's something that happens because the Spirit of God draws them in. Everybody who comes here looking for love, and I'm not talking about romantic, but I'm talking about the heart cry for a creator actually encounters it. Everybody who comes here looking for healing because they have known nothing but hurt in their life find healing here at the altar. And it doesn't have to be this one. It can be your desk. That altar can be your car. That altar can be the cashier desk or whatever at the grocery store. That altar can be multiple places. But it's when people come to us, we are a people of abundance that have something to give. And I want to tell you, this generation is going to be a generation that has something to give to those who are experiencing great need in their life. Experiencing relational needs, experiencing relational hurts. You're going to come to people who have nothing but negative thoughts about the future in their relationships. And about marriage, we see that all the time in our culture, right? They have nothing but negative perspective of marriage, and you're going to come and bring hope into those places. You're going to bring hope into those places. And Mike, you can come on up as I close with this. As Isaiah 40:31, and I'm going to read this in NIV says, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Have hope in the Lord, church. And ye shall walk the walk that God has called you to walk. Pursue Him. Be willing to pay the price. Because this hope isn't a lofty dream. This hope is an acknowledgement that I'm going to go where God leads me. But as Maria or somebody this morning said, there's power in our declaration. It's not enough to just simply say, oh God, I hope so, and go home. There needs to be a declaration of hope that happens among us. So today I'm going to ask you guys to stand with me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to release you in this congregation to go to somebody else and release hope that is inside of you. I want you to go to somebody and speak hope into their life. Now, you might have specific words. If God is putting something specific for that individual in the light of imparting hope, impart it. But you might simply, it might be more for you than them. You might have to go to somebody and declare something, not because they need to hear it, but because you need to say it. There's some of you that you need to verbalize the hope that is in your life. And if you verbalize it, you're going to see it. And if you're seeing it and you're looking at it, you're going to start walking towards it. So go ahead and find somebody. So go ahead and mingle. It's really, you don't have to have a special person that you go to, like, this is the person I need to talk to. Find somebody. And I want you to declare to them words of hope that maybe it's for them, or maybe it's something that's coming out of you and saying, I'm believing for such and such. So go ahead, I'm going to release you, pray for each other. Declare hope over their life. Declare hope over your life in Jesus' name.